Let's talk about decks, baby. Let's talk about strategy. Hello and welcome to episode 112 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast celebrating the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike in a post-ban world. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
So we're celebrating now, like Chi-Chi's a celebration of food?
That's exactly right.
I wasn't expecting it to be quite a celebration, but you know why it's a celebration, guys? Guess whose birthday it is this week? This episode comes out on Stanislav's birthday. Am I right?
The episode might come out early, given the subject matter. Friday is my birthday. I turn 32.
Now,
oh man, what a youth.
Now, what did you get for your birthday? Because I can think of two things you got. One is Aspiringspike is here on the episode with us. Evart Moughon. Did I say that right? Oh my God, please tell me I said it right.
I won't tell you.
Okay.
I'll leave you guessing. Happy birthday, Stan.
Thanks, guys.
I'm sorry your gift is so crappy. It's just me being on your podcast.
Honestly, it's exactly what I wanted.
Everett's carrying a big box full of bands for everybody today.
Yep. Sorry they're a little late.
The weather outside is frightful, but the podcast is so delightful.
That's right. We have the Godfather Dave and the Aspiringspike Evart. Hey, everybody.
So glad to get you on. We knew some bands were coming. I didn't think we knew quite this many.
Yeah.
This is a pretty big sea change, so I was so glad to be able to get your inside baseball opinion and thoughts on this.
I have many thoughts, and just let me know how you want me to organize them for you.
We're going to lead you through it. Stan's going to take us through it. It's a little light outline. We like to call the breakdown, the dive down, and the wind down, like you can expect every week.
That's right. That's right. On this week's episode, we rejoice at a band that's been practically a year in the making. Uro is finally gone in all the formats that we care about. But what's this? There's more? I'm getting reports that there's been a whole slew of cards banned across formats. Simian Spirit Guide, Tibalt's Trickery, changes to Cascade. Oh my. I think this means we have to do a BNR recap for the breakdown. Then we're going to spend the dive down figuring out what Magic is going to look like when all the dust settles. But first, let's kick off the show with the actual best part of every episode. It's housekeeping.
We've got Zach K, a different Zach K than the original fourth host, Zach. Welcome to the Dive Down Nation, Zach. We appreciate you joining. No new reviews this week. If you do have good things to say about us or constructive things to say about us, head on over to Apple Podcasts. I think that's still the only place you can really review us, unfortunately. If you don't use Apple Podcasts, just make an account, find us there, and then review us. It's worth your time because we shout you out. If you want to join the Patreon, head on over to patreon.com/thedivedown. That's where you can sign up to help keep us going, help support us, help us, afford the things that we do with the podcast, primarily pay our editor, also create some swag, and pay for the various subscriptions we have to use for this thing. But the benefit to you are plentiful. You can join the super secret Slack server for just the $1 a week tier. Going on up from there gets you other cool benefits. One of the main ones that we haven't mentioned for a while, $5 up, you get early access to the episode, which typically happens as early as Wednesday, I think is usual. A couple days early. It's one of the cool benefits you can get at the $5 tier. Going up from there is things like the awesome Citizen of the Nation playmat that Dave designed, working on custom episodes with us. But that's enough on that because we had a lot to talk about this week. But patreon.com/thedivedown.
You can also support us while playing Magic through a couple of ways. My favorite is Mana Traders. It's the rental service for Magic Online. If you use coupon code THEDIVEDOWN, all one word, you'll get 15% off your first 3 months of using Mana Traders. And now's a great time to sign up because Modern and other formats that are on Magic Online are a brewin'. Also, if you play Magic Arena, you can download the free companion software called Untapped over at untapped.thedivedown.com. Every time you download that software, we get a little kickback if you find it over at untapped.thedivedown.com. But that's all out of the way. Let's jump right in. It's ban time. We've been waiting for this basically all week, but secretly for like a year. Basically since the companion errata was the last ban that we cared about?
Well, was the companion errata after the Astrolabe ban or before? I think Astrolabe got banned after, but it's all kind of a blur.
It really is. Evart, here's a question I have for you. When did you first realize that Oko needed to go?
Oko or Uro?
Oh, sorry, Uro. My bad. Oko, we all that was old news. Yeah, Uro I meant. Sorry.
I waffled on it for a long time, and there was a long period of time where I didn't think that Oko needed to go. Or sorry, you got me saying
yeah,
it.
Totally.
Uro,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, it is kind of hard to talk about Uro without talking about Oko. If you spend enough time, the two will come up together. But there's a long time I thought Uro was fine. There were definitely a lot of cards that beat it, like Narset and Boyle, Relic of Progenitus. You know, anybody could play Graveyard Hate that lined up well against the card. But the more I played with it, the more I played against it. The reality was, like, the biggest issue with Uro is that the cards that don't beat Uro usually don't beat the rest of the cards in the Uro decks. They don't usually beat Field of the Dead. They don't usually beat Omnath or Teferi, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Cryptic Command. That was just always the biggest problem for me, is that if you wanted to sideboard all these cards against Uro, they'd often be trading 0 for 1, where your opponent's Uro would still draw a card, and then you'd be losing card advantage and mana advantage against a deck that's just trying to grind you into dust, by outvaluing you in card quality and card quantity. So I've been in favor of an Uro ban for like probably 3 or 4 months now, maybe not as long as everybody else. I wasn't necessarily in favor of making any other changes to the format. I was kind of interested in just banning Uro and seeing what the Mystic Sanctuary Field of the Dead decks looked like at the time. But I don't mind just getting ahead and going ahead and banning both Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary. I think it actually makes a lot of sense. I think that both of those cards are probably going to leave the format at some point anyways. And I also think it makes a lot of sense if you're going to nerf the blue decks this hard, if you're going to ban Uro, if you're going to ban Sanctuary, if you're going to ban Field, that the monkey also has to go.
Right.
That the blue decks were the only things holding back Oopsal Spells and Belcher and Neoform, Tibalt's Trickery.
Totally. All right.
And you gave this guy a window and he threw a bunch of chairs through
Totally true. And you know what? I love it. Let's dial it back and take it through piece by piece, because it is hard to not have a connected discussion about all these things.
Yeah.
But for people who only get their Magic news from us, and I know that there are literally hundreds of thousands of listeners who only get their Magic news from us. Shane, you have a good write-up here.
Did we not list all the cards banned yet?
We didn't list them yet.
No, I mean, so, okay, this is me starting the breakdown. Okay, this is the smooth transition into the breakdown. Evart opened the door and I'm walking through it. So February 15th, 2021, a day that will live in infamy because, man, a lot of stuff got banned. And I think what makes sense for us in the breakdown here, take some time going through the different format bannings. We'll go briefly over WOTC's justifications for doing so in the announcement, and then kind of talk about how we think this will affect the formats sort of on the whole. What's our take on each format? So talk about the cards, then talk about the format impact altogether. One of the things I want to talk about before we actually get into the format bans themselves is the very first paragraph in this article, because I thought it was pretty interesting and slightly revealing and potentially, I don't know what's the proper term. It's something to have a take about. So what they say is that because of pandemic conditions resulting in fewer high-level tabletop tournaments, they correspondingly slowed the pace of banned and restricted list changes in non-rotating formats, but recent community discussion has made it clear, unquote, that people wanted shakeups. Then they go on to say that they looked closely at all of these formats and responded to both play data and community feedback, which is kind of their new MO in these announcements is, hey, we're hearing your feedback and we're making changes based on that as well. And so my initial take on this and why I wanted to talk about it is this sounds really reactive to me. Like WOTC is writing in a way, to me, that indicates that they think things are pretty fine, but that the like community rabble rousers and the community voice has forced them to act in some way. So then they're taking the look at these formats and saying, okay, we can make some tweaks in that fashion. And I feel like WOTC should be taking a more active role in monitoring these formats, because like we've had announcement after announcement in the past year or so come across with this kind of tone, which is like, we thought everything was fine, but you all are making a lot of noise, and fine, we'll do something about it. And I think it's strange that they would say, like, you know, either they're being very hands off or ignoring them, or that they just don't really think that it's worth taking any action. And I'm curious what you all think and feel about this sort of tone that they're setting in the outset of this article. Like, maybe I'm alone here, which is fine.
Well, I definitely see where you're coming from, Shane, and I kind of feel like you're echoing a pretty common sentiment that Wizards is disconnected from the non-rotating format specifically. They're not super involved, and they have had this hands-off approach. And I don't really completely agree. I think there is some truth in what you're saying, but I do think that Wizards monitors the non-rotating formats, and I do think they understand typically what community sentiment is. But what I think we're seeing here is not them starting to watch for the first time. I think what we're seeing is a philosophy shift in their ban philosophy, where they had just been banning things based on win percentages, and that's about it, and non-rotating
cold
formats
hard data
for a long time, and that's largely because of the Twitter mob and reactionary people, and they have thousands and thousands of people telling them different things about the format, different opinions, and it's really hard to sift through all that data. So they should just go by their like Magic Online numbers. That being said, I like that they have shifted, and my own personal philosophy on banning cards and formats is shifting too, where I think if gameplay is suffering, even if one deck is not winning so much that it needs to be banned, changes should happen, because at the end of the day, this is a card game, and your card game needs to be fun in order for people to keep playing it. And when I look at specifically the modern ban list, can we talk about that yet, or did we?
Yeah, because let's just go into it.
Yeah. So when you talk
unless Stan or Dave, you have any kind of takes about kind of like the tone that WOTC is setting here.
Dave, what do you think of Shane's interpretation?
I mean, I think it's kind of like I wish that they had said something about the card philosophy of recent years causing some of these bans, or like the fact that these cards are the ones that are getting banned are mostly new ones. I wish that they had said a little bit about that. Their tone about like in reaction to chatter in the community is like, I don't know what else they're supposed to react to. You know what I mean? Like they I'm sure they're watching data on Magic Online. I think the biggest number that they're looking at is attendance. Honestly, I think that the drop off in the Modern League, and also the problem that Modern had firing events so quickly in the last couple of weeks, I think was just a huge red flag to them. And, people have been tired of Uro for a long time. And so the headline card being banned across all those formats, I think was probably just something they knew they were going to have to do eventually. It's been out for over a year. It's time to just rip the Band-Aid off and, have everybody torch $50 per Uro and kind of move on from there, I don't know. What do you think, Stan?
The only thing I would nitpick over is I feel like you're making this assumption that their inaction means everything is fine. And I'm not sure that's actually in the language, that they thought the formats were healthy. I think what they're saying is,
that's fair.
We didn't think people were playing as much Magic because of a pandemic, and it's primarily online players, which is kind of a niche audience in the first place.
Yeah, but I think there's an interesting recognition in what you're saying here too, which is like, they need to realize that online Magic is a huge part of, they know it, revenue wise, it's a huge part of their revenue. They also, they need to recognize that that's just what's going to be going on for a while still. I mean, we're probably, maybe 2022 still before we have any big paper tournaments, honestly. And I think that's they might be recognizing that a little bit too. Like online Magic is the Magic that exists right now, realistically, especially when it comes to any kind of competitive sense.
Yeah, tournament Magic. Yeah, competitive Magic. All right, so let's get into those modern bans that we have been hinting about and talking about a little bit. So again, let's move through these bannings one by one, provide WOTC's justification, maybe a quick little take on that, but then we'll kind of wrap up at the end after we get through all of them. So starting with the biggest banger, perhaps, but also the one we've known the longest about because of the Secret Lair announcement, sort of spoiling it, and that's Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. Basically, they said that it's a dominant fixture across many of the top modern decks and operates at a power level that makes it difficult for the other mid-range and control strategies to compete. That's certainly something that we've been acknowledging and saying here on the podcast. Not a novel opinion, but one that we do have. It's just too good at what it does. It requires mid-range and control decks pretty much to be base blue-green because of the sheer value it offers early and late in the game. And what they hope will happen is that this opens space for a greater variety of mid-range and other slower decks to coexist, which I would say is likely true. Like you don't have to, or you can't, in this case, like base your strategies around something like Uro, and you can explore other color combinations. Like I've heard red, black, green has been okay for mid-range at some point in the past. So maybe try that.
Now, I accidentally made Evart spill his take on Uro a little bit early here. But does anybody have a different take on it? You know, just as a refresher, a few minutes ago, Evart said basically the cards that beat Uro don't really beat the other cards in the Uro decks, and so it leads to this really difficult way for people to attack the metagame when it's dominated by Uro. And of course, we all acknowledge there are a few reasons to not play the card, right? And so in any of these kind of control or mid-range strategies, you're able to pivot between those two strategies pretty easily, and it is what it is. It just ended up being such a force of gravity.
I loved how you framed that initial question to Evart, which was, when did you first realize that Uro had to go? And I'd love to hear you both answer that too.
Shane, you were early on the Uro's gotta go track, am I right?
I don't know. I've always been of the opinion that like Uro is a weird card because like it doesn't do anything particularly egregious in and of itself. It's just like all of the bits of it add up to something that does too much. And so like it's one of those cards where it's like you can be like whatever it was saying, which is I think that I can see a world in which Uro is okay. But then as it goes on and on and on, then you realize, okay, this is adding up to too much of a good thing. And it's also requiring, it makes too many decks sort of coalesce around its unique power level and its sort of unique abilities that it has. And I think that's kind of where we get to the bad parts of Uro. And so it's like, I've always been weirdly on the fence about it, which is like, yeah, what is it doing that's so bad besides everything? And
I will say, for Uro to be the best card in the format, I really don't feel like it led for a bad format. You know, it needed to go. It's been around for too long and we're sick of it. But I think when Uro was king, the format was not too bad for me saying this. These are the words I'd say at Uro's funeral. You know, the format wasn't too bad.
Now, Uro, you weren't as bad as Hogak.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, it wasn't as bad as Hogak, wasn't as bad as Eldrazi, wasn't as nearly as bad as these last 2 weeks with Valky and Tibalt. Not even close. Yeah. And I think that's worth acknowledging.
Uro, you could have been worse.
Yeah, you could have been worse.
I mean, it is a weird thing, right? Like, we're talking about a card that's now been banned in every format except for Legacy and Vintage. It might still get banned in Legacy. It's weird because it is a fair card. You know, Odin's member of the nation in the chat just said Uro is 150% fair. And like, that's kind of what it is, right? Like, it's the most fair card of all the fair cards, and so it had to go because it was too much card.
I don't know. The fact that one copy of Uro gets cast, and then you just get to keep casting it over and over again the whole game, and I don't know.
It speeds up your resource engine by putting mana on the battlefield. It draws you a card, I think I would need to be convinced why it's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the issues is like it also stops every creature or trades with every creature besides like a super pumped up Death Shadow.
Yeah. I just think it's one of those things where we've talked about it a couple of times where it does, like, cards like this do so many individual things that are small that they're fair things that they do taken on their own, but when you put them together on one thing, then it becomes definitionally probably unfair, right? But anyway, we should do a whole app sometime in the future.
Uro good, Uro Uro gone.
Yeah, Uro good, Uro gone. And good riddance, honestly. I mean, I own 3 of them. I never got to play that. I bought them after the pandemic started. I never got to play them. They're going to go on my wall of shame with Once Upon a Time and a few other things, you know?
Yeah. At least you didn't have them banned en route from Russia, like I've had with a few
Was
cards.
that Once Upon a Time for you? Or
that
what?
was Once Upon a Time,
Yeah.
I believe, yeah. Okay.
Wait, I'm not done.
Okay, you're not done.
We need to talk about Uro some more. He's been around for so long. We can't just pretend it wasn't a thing. So I had the same feeling that Evart kind of alluded to earlier, where for a long time I was on the fence of whether or not Uro had to go. And we have a tiny bit of hindsight now. And I wonder if maybe that was Stockholm Syndrome, in the same way that right before Astrolabe got banned, there was plenty of people, myself including, saying, you know, maybe Modern's not so bad even with Astrolabe around. And then that banning nerfed Uro a bit, and suddenly we were like, you know, just pack a path, right? Or any amount of graveyard hate. Play a Soul Guide Lantern, you know, and your Uro is managed.
Yeah. I mean, the card that you reminded me of when you were talking about right there is actually Splinter Twin, which is like, I mean, I know that's like the third rail to bring up, but I think people just kind of thought Splinter Twin was a given for Modern forever. And then when they banned it, everybody was like, whoa, maybe this world without it can be better.
Today has been a good reminder that there are no sacred cows in Magic the Gathering, you know?
And we're going to talk about a sacred monkey in a couple minutes. How about do we want to move on from Uro here?
Yeah, I think we can kind of probably...
We're going to loop back to it to other formats, because the other weird thing about Uro is that it really did fulfill different roles in different formats depending on the power level of those formats. But
all right, so like we knew about Uro. After that stuff got wild, and in my opinion, a little bit unexpected. I honestly expected that we were going to get just like a Cascade rules change, which is a bit of a spoiler, and Uro. We got a lot more in multiple formats. So we also got Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary. They got sort of bundled together by WOTC as 2 land cards that we feel are decreasing diversity of gameplay patterns and create repetitive and non-interactive game states in the late game for relatively low deck building cost. And so, in order to promote back and forth gameplay and interaction over win conditions, which I think is a very interesting sentence, they were removed. And I think these 2 land cards have been on most people's, or many people's, shortlist for like most annoying cards in the format for a while. I'm not too surprised to see them leave, because they did do a lot for a little.
Yes. So what's interesting about the news of the BNR is that it kind of affected literally everyone. And it's equal parts because of the games you're going to play against the field, as well as the games you're going to play yourself as someone who, in some likelihood, probably piloted a deck that used one of these cards. Not guaranteed, but there's a lot of cards being banned, so it affects a lot of players. And Mystic Sanctuary is the one that really hits me, because I don't know, before Mystic Sanctuary, Cryptic Command was not as good. And I feel like a post Mystic Sanctuary world is going to be kind of a new identity for Control that I think at least one of my guest co-hosts will also have to reckon with.
You know, I've been kind of out on Control decks for a while. I'm recognizing my own limitations as a player right now, and I'm actually thrilled with all of this stuff because I think it makes my deck better, but we'll talk about that later. I think, you know, we had a whole episode about why Mystic Sanctuary was probably too good, right? It was like the summation we got to at the end of it, where we talked about all the different ways that it added too much value for no cost, problematic. Field of the Dead, I mean, people just talk about that card constantly, and so we've all seen what it's done to a deck like Titan, or any build of Titan. So
the 4-color Uro Omnath decks,
yeah,
them.
Absolutely. I mean, Spike, what do you think about these? I mean, these are cards that you played a lot.
Yeah, I feel like you have a lot of takes on these, I'm guessing.
I do. I think that Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary could not exist. One could not exist without the other in the format, and it's these mid-range and control decks. If you ban one, their mana becomes so much better because they get to build around one and not the other. Like the two cards were so good that it was worth having shaky mana to support both. Although the mana did function partially because Uro lets you put extra lands into play. You would still be able to make the mana base work without Uro and without one of these lands. And so you could go more in and play more islands or Sanctuary, or if you don't need to play all these islands for Sanctuary, your Field of the Deads are going to be much stronger. And so I thought that it would be a mistake to ban one or the other. And so I'm glad that they're leaving at the same time. And I do think that they're right. They reduce the diversity of gameplay patterns, and they lead to repetitive and uninteractive games. And I will not miss them. I was thinking that with Uro gone, we can see how bad these cards are, because I tend to have a pretty conservative approach to banning things, but good riddance, really.
You're not going to miss Sanctuary? Yeah. I mean, you did so
them.
much work for demonstrating Sanctuary's power level in Miracles, Counterbalance.
Yeah. I'll miss Counterbalance. I don't know. I played with Mystic Sanctuary every single day since Eldraine came out, and ultimately I like when Magic changes. I like when there's reasons to play different cards. I like, I don't like having to play Sanctuary in all of my blue decks, and Sanctuary's too good, and I'm glad that it's gone.
There you go. Tough to disagree with that.
The final take. Next up.
But actually, it's fetch lands that are too good.
Yeah. I mean,
Uro, Fields of Dead, and Mystic Sanctuary. I don't think any of them would be on the ban list if fetch lands weren't legal, but that's just that's a whole podcast.
We can probably fit 3 minutes on that at the end. We have a little section at the end for why does this keep happening.
There might be more cards on the modern ban list that would be legal if fetch lands were not legal than there are fetch lands at this point. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to count.
Ooh, that's a take. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened from this was, okay, the blue decks got nerfed, right? And as Everett was hinting earlier, the blue decks were being the good police for a certain other type of deck, and so that deck also had to be hit. Shane?
Yeah. Simian Spirit Guide. The Mana Monkey, finally gone. WOTC stated that they have had their eye on it for some time as an enabler that speeds up fast combo decks, and as the modern card pool has grown, too many early game winning combos have shown up and been powered by the fast mana ability of Mana Monkey. They give examples of Oops All Spells, the Charbelcher decks, and now some of the Tibalt's Trickery builds. So basically, they just want to slow combo decks down. And Simian Spirit Guide is a goner. A lot of us have suspected that Simian Spirit Guide is kind of at just the right amount of annoying power. And especially as there's enough low CMC spells and low CMC artifacts and things like that, where it's like, hey, if you can get this on the battlefield too quickly, the game kind of sucks. So let's get rid of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, so Stan and I had like a brainstorming call last night where we were just talking about what could happen on the ban list. And we originally had a bunch of stuff filed under what other cards do we wish had gotten banned. And I put Simian Spirit Guide on that list last night, thinking that there was like an outside shot that they might take it out here because of the Tibalt decks, honestly. And I was pretty surprised that it actually happened, but I do think this is a card that like is in that class of cards that everybody just needs to watch, keep an eye on in Modern. And they finally went for it. I think it's Lotus Petal is a good card, and even one that only makes red mana is a good card. So I really I wasn't too surprised to see it finally go, because it does do a whole bunch of stuff that's just super annoying in the format with non-interactive combo decks, and I don't like to play those decks. I don't like to play against those decks, and so I feel bad that to see it go for the people who like those, but I think it was time, and they were getting too fast. Let's say not too consistent, but too fast.
There were 4 decks that could kill you on turn 1 in Modern, and all of them killed on turn 1 with the monkey.
Yeah.
You know? That was the common
Who knew
card.
a 3-mana 2/2 could be so problematic?
So this is I've talked about this bucket of cards before that I feel like Simian Spirit Guide is in and has now been banned, so it's out of it. But like this is the Street Wraith, Mishra's Bauble, Manamorphose, Simian Spirit Guide. Like there's that layer of cards that are like the glue for a whole bunch of different decks that are actually kind of broken because
like they're nonsense cards.
Yeah, they're kind of nonsense cards, and it's like a question. It's not really a question of when to me, but they're very, I feel like all of them are on a wall somewhere where it's like, we need to watch Manamorphose. If Manamorphose starts going too crazy, that card's going to get banned. They're not going to worry about it if they decide to ban it. And it was just Simian Spirit Guide's day, I think. I don't know. What do you think there's a list of cards like that still?
I think most of them are on the or still. I mean, Faithless Looting, Mox Opal are kind of the two that I think about. Used to be Ancient Stirrings on the list, and then they banned KCI instead. Astrolabe was on the list its whole time in the format. Yeah, there are some very efficient enablers. I think the best ones have been banned. Besides fetch lands, those are actually the best ones, and I'm not joking. Fetch lands are the best enablers and the best mana fixers.
Yeah.
But and I do think that we're gonna have to have a real conversation about fetch lands in Modern at some point. But it's probably like 5 years down the line
after the second set of Triomes gets printed.
Yeah, I think that there are 7.5 cards on the Modern ban list that would not be banned if it weren't for fetch lands. So when that number becomes more than 10, we can talk about it.
I think that conversation happened, though, when Pioneer was invented.
Maybe. I don't know if that's the entire reason why the format was made, but it could definitely be.
Okay, we got to talk about this last one. This one's perhaps the craziest, or at least the most unexpected, at least for me, because this card was legal in Modern for less than 3 weeks and legal in paper for even less time, and that is Tibalt's Trickery. I'm pretty sure this is like the fastest ban of a Modern card besides the stuff that was banned out of the gate. And so because Modern has Cascade cards, Trickery was seen as, quote, uniquely problematic, even though the win rate was not seen as problematic, of course. Wizards loves talking about, hey, look, the win rate's not that bad.
All these decks are bad. Why do you guys even play any of
them? Modern was, quote, less fun to play, unquote, with Trickery in it. They decided to remove it, as the ultimate goal, they said, was to shake up the metagame into a more fun spot, which is kind of the baseline of the conversation I want to have in a minute after we talk about this Cascade rule change. But man, they banned that fast. They were like, we do not need Tibalt's Trickery Cascade shenanigans in our format. And I guess that's fair.
Yeah, this is the start of a philosophy shift as far as bans go, where gameplay is just taking a big role in what is going to be allowed in the game and what's not going to be.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Pioneer later on, and I think we will definitely see that sentiment mirrored in Pioneer. And I think if we look back at the way that they have shaped Pioneer, I think that we can see that more prevalent there as well. That philosophy, at least, if not execution.
I mean, the thing with this card is that the decks were only going to get better over, like, people are probably going to figure out better ways to do them, better ways to have them, become more consistent, or have it be part of a package that has another combo in it, or something. I had no doubt that over time it probably would have gotten even worse than it was.
How did it get printed in the first place?
Yeah, right.
Well, here's the fascinating thing about that. So I do not have the tweet in front of me, so I feel a little awkward paraphrasing it.
It's never stopped you before, Dave.
So someone asked Aaron Forsyth about why they didn't just errata. Like, it led to a whole discussion where Aaron Forsyth was kind of like, we might change cards on Arena someday and not in paper, or they might errata things more often because Arena is so important. But one of the side notes that he said in it was, someone said, why didn't you errata Trickery to just be opponent's spell instead of banning the card completely? And what he said was, that would have effectively banned the card.
Yeah, Tibalt's Trickery was never meant to counter your opponent's
that's what you
spell.
said. That's what you said on that.
But that's the thing that's interesting to me is, like, they didn't design it with that intention either. Like,
So what was the intention?
For it to be a combo piece, a nonsense combo piece.
Yeah, what the Tibalt's Trickery decks, Cascade, it was not meant to be cascaded into. That was not intentional, in my opinion. But the way we see them in Standard, just play a 0-drop, Tibalt's Trickery it, maybe hit something big. That's absolutely what the card was meant to do. And I kind of think that that's fine. There are some players who like that kind of gameplay, and I think it was designed with the mill line of text to just not be very consistent, and sometimes you win big, but it's probably not big enough to take down a tournament. And I actually, as far as that design goes, I'm a big fan. I don't think they realize that you could just cascade into it and then always hit Evercool.
Yeah.
And that's not fun. You just multi one card, you cast the one card, and if it wins, it wins. It's dumb, and it's no longer modern legal, and I think that makes sense.
Good for them for really just going like, this is nonsense. Let's get rid of it and move on.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm sorry to people who bought Omniscience and all the Eldrazi Titans and everything, or anyone who did that and is losing money right now. But
I mean, if you did buy that, then you knew what you were potentially in for. Yeah, I've been there. Okay, so speaking of Cascade, we also got an important modern-focused rule change, and that is Cascade was tweaked. And so basically, the spell cast off of the triggered ability must also have lesser CMC than the spell with Cascade. That's it. That's the rule. Why wasn't this always the rule? The world may never know. But for a little bit more detail, what this really means is that if the dominant characteristic, that's in quotes, of the card is lower than the Cascade spell, it qualifies for the Cascade effect, but you cannot cast a spell on that card that is not legal. So, for an example, something like an adventure spell, Fey of Wishes, that costs 2 in the upper right corner, right? That would be seen by Violent Outburst, a 3 CMC Cascade spell, but that doesn't let you cast Granted, because Granted, the adventure spell, costs 4. Then vice versa, Bone Crusher Giant is a 3 CMC adventure spell. Stomp, the instant part, whatever the storybook part, I don't know what you call that, that's only 2, but you still can't cast it because Violent Outburst does not see Stomp as it's cascading. That always was the case, but the rule has not changed on that. In the case of MDFCs, that means you can cast, let's say, Valky, 2 CMC spell, but not Tibalt, because Tibalt costs 7, right? Of course. So split cards stay the same. They have the combined CMC of both spells because they don't have, I mean, in my guesstimation, they have no dominant characteristic. It's both spells on one card. So that's how they give the CMC of those. So really all this means is it checks twice. It checks the first time how it always has checked. Nothing is different. Cascade sees the same spells off of the Cascade trigger. But then it rechecks that the spell that you want to cast off that card is legal as well. So like I said, why wasn't this just the way this always worked? Like I've seen a few people say like this was such an elegant solution, and not to like dismiss that opinion. I think it's just like that's the obvious way it should always have worked to me. It's just like a good solution that should make sense, I think.
Well, I think when they printed Cascade, there weren't cards that worked the way NDFCs work, and I feel like this is a forgivable oversight, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think they fixed it relatively quickly. And I also think that this means we're going to see more cards like Valky that are cheap spells on the front and expensive spells on the back.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I do think those cards lead to good gameplay, so I'm excited to see more cards like that. And I'm glad that they've nipped it in the bud, and this won't be a problem going forward.
Yeah, now the question is, are there other places that need to be nipped because of that? But we'll keep an eye on the old cards and see what happens. But
so here's the real conversation that I think matters in the end. And what do you all think? Like, is Modern going to be shaken up into a more fun spot, which is what the intentions of these bans are, according to WOTC? More fun.
I hope so. Fun is subjective. I had a lot of fun playing today. I think that Modern will be in a good shape after the dust settles, but it's hard to figure out what's going on because there's still a big pile of dust.
There's 2 situations in Modern and other constructed formats that are the most fun way to play a constructed format. The first situation is if your absolute favorite deck is tier 1. Okay, that feels amazing. The second situation is immediately after a ban or an appropriate unban. And that dusty post BNR scenario where people are trying to find their sea legs is some of the most inventive situations for constructed play that I encounter on a pretty regular basis over the last few years because of the rate of BNRs. Like, people love it, and this is especially true of unbans. But even when something like a ban happens and people kind of say, like Liliana the Veil has been effectively unbanned today, like, I think that's also true. You get to play with a lot of cards that were outmoded because something broken and overpowered got printed. So maybe we'll find in a month or less that there's something insane that needs to go already, and we'll be mad again, come March. That being said, the next couple weeks are going to be super fun.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
I mean, Evert, you came in with a lot of positive energy for this. So was this just like, you woke up and you saw the VNR and you were like, they really did it. I can't believe it. They really did it.
Yeah. I mean, this is my favorite thing to do is play Magic the Gathering, and when I get to play new games and things are changing, everybody's having fun and playing their own decks, just like Stan said, it's just a ton of fun. And I'm having a blast. I'm looking forward to it. I know it's going to be a great time, and I'm looking forward to enjoying the ride, and we'll get to wherever we go is kind of where I'm thinking right now.
What do you think WOTC means when they say more fun? Like, do you think it means like giving more people time to like enact their strategies? Like, are they trying to get rid of really fast combo decks so that people feel like they have some agency there?
I think the big phrase that tips me to what they think is fun is back and forth gameplay.
Yeah, that was that's a line that I definitely wanted to pick out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right about that. It's hard to quantify fun. Everybody enjoys different things about Magic, and that's what's kind of great about it, is that there's dozens of decks and just a million different ways you can play, and there's somebody that enjoys each and every one. So you're never going to make everybody happy. And so I think that fun is a very vague, abstract word, and maybe we just shouldn't read too much into it. Maybe we should just enjoy it.
It's interesting that they picked out the word interaction over win conditions, which is like so. It's almost meaningless in what that like actually is, but it's interesting that they're focusing on we want to bring some back and forth and some interaction back into the format. And I'm not certain that like these are exactly the things that are going to do so. Like if you want to, like, Uro and the Uro Omnath decks had a lot of interaction, right? Like, there's a lot of things happening. You had a lot of ability to counter spells and have some point interaction and stuff like that. But I think when they talk about things like Simian Spirit Guide and perhaps the lands that are hard to interact with, like Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary, and that's sort of like a kit of parts, like it went along with Uro, I'd say, those two lands. So I don't know. I think it's like it's a pretty sweeping change. I think it's a fundamental change. I think that we'll have an idea of we'll have this will cast a shadow for like the next few weeks where a few of our old friends will be like peeking their heads out from the corners, and then we might have some like a whole new thing saying like, hey, look at me, I'm in the sunlight now, I have a chance to do something cool. And I'm hopeful about what will be an option. Like, even just being able, like, humans got crushed by like 4-color Uro Omnath decks, right? So being able to like go back in and say, hey, you know what Death Shadow decks don't like playing against? Humans. I think people are gonna play a lot next week? Rakdos Shadow. Like, maybe I can just like go have fun and be like, haha, like I'm having fun with humans again. Like, why not?
All right, let's move on to Historic, because compared to Modern, and we will try to get to Pioneer, this felt like a very tempered, very expected, and perhaps, the least exciting format to talk about, just because all they really did was they banned Uro, and they functionally banned Omnath by calling it banned instead of just keeping it on the suspended list. So that changes nothing.
Right.
Hey, no, it changed my wild card collection, because I think I had 3 Omnath, and now that I got banned, I've got 3 mythic wild cards.
Hey, you can use them on nothing because
I already have like 30.
Them. Yeah,
and I have like 10 regular rare wilds and 30 mythics.
Yeah.
So in the BNR article, they stated again that Uro decks are the most played in Historic, have been for a while now, and that dominance shows too powerful for the format, which makes sense because this card is too powerful for other formats too, potentially even too powerful for Legacy.
This is a very short write-up for Historic, and it is what it is. I agree with the take that like Sultai was annoying. It wasn't always the best deck. It wasn't always the most dominant deck. You could get around it. There were lots of ways to play around it. The big difference here is that it was a little harder to get enough cards in the graveyard to escape Uro over and over again. You could usually do it pretty well once. It was a lot harder to do it twice because there's not that many fetch lands. There's just Fabled Passage. And so the power level was definitely reduced here, but it's still a big beater and it was still all over the place. And I'm still glad that it's gone, honestly.
Shane, do you think this will actually shake up what's at the top of the Historic format?
I personally don't so much, mainly because the top of the Historic meta was stuff that already beat Sultai, right? It wasn't like Sultai was stomping on things like Gruul or stomping on things like Jund Sack, these other decks that you could clamor tier 1, because they have a matchup against Sultai about 55%. And that's over a lot of matches on the Untapped. And what's really crazy to me is that Untapped data over many months shows that Sultai ramp has pretty average to negative matchups against a lot of popular decks in Historic, besides the controlling decks. And there's, tens of thousands of matchups to back this claim up. And personally, I don't think that Historic was in that bad of a shape. And I don't really think that Uro was really heavily warping the metagame around it, because we have data that indicates that it wasn't. But I do hate Uro, and I'm glad it's gone. I'm glad it sort of opens up the meta a little bit, just like it did, I think it will in Modern, where it's like, hey, if you want to build a mid-range ramp control type strategy, you don't have to start with Uro. You don't have to start in heavy Simic. You can explore other good cards and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a couple of cool like Jund, and not to bring Jund up again, but like Jund-esque mid-range decks and Abzan-esque mid-range decks, and like I've seen those decks in Historic before, and so it would be interesting to see if they turn out to be good. Like I think that there's making it so that people can pick other cards with that strategy is great, because there was just nothing that could touch the efficiency of Uro once you really came down to it. But there are some people who are upset that they didn't go far enough in Historic, but I think this one will be a real wait and see. Like, I still enjoy the format quite a bit. I know you yeah.
I think the Sacrifice deck has no bad matchups.
Yeah, it's
now.
really good.
Well, the only matchup that I was thinking about, and if we could talk about it now for a minute, is I could see green-white taxes getting a lot more popular if Jund and Raxac become higher up on the list, because they're incentivized to play Yasharn. They also play Skyclave Apparition, which is kind of a bummer for that deck because it hits a creature and it also can hit the Oven if that's the best target on the field,
which is the best
and
part
it exiles
about
stuff. Yeah, so if they have a sack engine out and somebody apparitions you, then you can sack in response, but they can get your Oven with it is the big thing there. But I do think that ultimately, my take on Historic is that I think sack is going to get quite a bit better.
It's honestly crazy to me that they didn't ban something from the Sacrifice deck and the Goblins deck too. I don't really get it. It feels like such a different approach to Modern, honestly. I'm not super in tune with Historics, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I anticipate Goblins and Sacrifice running rampant until something gets banned from them.
Yeah, it's weird because I think that the data we have in Historic is from different types of sources. Like, I think Untapped is one source of that data, and Untapped has its own its own window of looking at the data, right? And it's not necessarily de facto correct. So like you can say Goblins already beat Sultai just fine. And then I think there's plenty of people who would say, hey, if you look at maybe the last 3 weeks, which you can't do on Untapped because just the granularity isn't there, the Sultai decks have tweaked and are able to now beat Goblins on a regular basis, or at least have a positive win rate against Goblins. And so I think that it remains to be seen what it looks like and what the metagame looks like in the coming weeks. But I think that people will want more changes in the near future.
The one last thing I'll add about this Uro ban in Historic is I think we might see more variety among control and mid-range strategies in Historic, because right now Sultai is just the only control and mid-range deck you can actually play. Maybe with the exception of Red-Black Arcanist has a bit of a mid-range plan, but otherwise Blue-White control, Blue-Black control, I think are very fringy, and right now there's a little bit more incentive to kind of explore their potential at solving specific problems. So we might, this could be wishful thinking, but maybe we'll find ways to address problems such as Sacrifice's potential by looking into other control strategies that can tune to that metagame.
Yeah, I totally agree. It'll be interesting. We cut the top off of the meta and see where it goes from there. I mean, honestly, Nissa that shakes the world is still good. You know, like, yes. I mean, Sultai might still be good. It just might have a different card in that slot. Yeah. So
just play more Crasises, play more Nissas, play that Serpent.
Yeah.
That puts a 3/3 every upkeep.
So
can't be countered.
It might not be the end of Sultai itself. I mean, there's lots of other stuff going on there. Okay, so should we move off of Historic? There was definitely a lot more to talk about in Modern, but there's a lot to talk about in Pioneer.
Yeah, which is like, how much time do we want to give this? Because it's still like, man, I want Pioneer to be good.
This will be our first time talking about Pioneer in 2021.
Oh my gosh, I think you're right.
I don't think that's true, but
Pioneer's your old friend that was toxic and you had to sever ties with, and is working on themselves really hard, and you're really rooting for them, and maybe one day you'll rekindle the friendship, but it's just not time.
You still think it's not time, Evert? I was going to ask you if today is that day.
At least that's how it is for me. I don't know. I saw the announcement. I think that these are probably good decisions. I still don't really want to play Pioneer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to want to. I don't know how to want to play Pioneer. It needs a horizon set. It needs a horizon set is what Pioneer needs. They need to print cards into Pioneer. I think that's what it needs.
Or pull the curtain back beyond Return to Ravnica.
That could be good. Dude, then I could just play RTR Innistrad Standard.
Exactly.
Pioneer. That's
awesome. What everybody wants.
Yeah.
More Innistrad cards.
Yeah. Okay.
We should probably talk about what actually got banned.
I would play Pioneer. I would play Pioneer if they put Innistrad in it.
I love it.
I would. Yeah.
Snapcaster Mage and Pioneer.
Heck yeah.
I mean, it's not getting played in Modern anymore, or is it?
It'll be Snap, Wild/Snap.
Exactly. All right, so they banned Uro in Pioneer, just like we talked about. It is what it is. I do like the note from the initial write-up that was kind of like, our vision from Pioneer is to be a collection of the most fun, powerful, and iconic cards and strategies from recent standard formats. That's maybe the clearest encapsulation I've ever heard anybody explain for what Pioneer is supposed to be.
It's a very interesting statement.
Not even close to that, though, is it?
They're so off this goal.
And never has been. It's never been close to that, right?
I don't think so.
No, I actually feel like it was before Theros came out. I don't know. There was like great red decks, great ramp decks, great blue-white decks, lots of interesting, vehicles and green strategies, and you could play all these devotion decks, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I don't feel like it felt like standard. I mean, it didn't feel like old standard decks coming back. Every time someone tried to do that, they got stomped.
They were their own things, right? Like, I mean...
Yeah, but it kind of felt like archetypes of different standard decks, like the best versions that you've ever seen of the ramp and control and, aggro decks. And then, Fastest Oracle and Uro and Heliod and Underworld Breach got printed, and then nothing was done about it for the longest time. And then new cards like Omnath, entered. The Undercity Informer shenanigans started happening with the MDFCs, and we see a lot of the problems gone now, and Pioneer is probably going to be in a good shape going forward, but I do believe that Pioneer was really fun before Theros came out.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I was really into it, and I was like so excited to travel to Arizona, where I bet you guys, and play in this Pioneer paper tournament. It was great, and here we are, more than a year later in this cold winter, and Pioneer's not fun anymore. Modern is good again, but maybe next year it'll be a warm winter, and it'll be paper tournaments again, and we'll like Pioneer, and it'll be really fun. And Innistrad will be in the format at that point. And I look forward to it.
Everett's just fully signing on to Stan's idea now.
I think it's a great idea. I love it. Yeah.
Let's not go back to Mirrodin though, because we don't want Phyrexian mana to get into Pioneers. So,
oh my gosh!
You also get Mana Leak too, which is
Okay, so Uro got banned.
Talk about the actual cards?
Yeah, Uro got banned.
Uro.
We talked about it. Uro was a pain in this format. It was difficult. Omnath is in this format still, and
Will it be good enough without its buddy Uro though?
Well, it has another buddy named Niv-Mizzet that we should keep in mind, and that's what led to the other card. One of the other cards that was banned, which is Teferi Time Raveler. Now, people have asked for this card to be banned in many formats, and now it is. Mm-hmm. It's in Modern still, but it's gone otherwise. What do we think about that?
Teferi the Fun Raveler has been a thorn in everybody's side for a long time, until the last 2 weeks where it was a hero against the Cascade deck. Kind of. It wasn't good enough. It was too slow. I don't know. I like Teferi going. Teferi is, I think, very unfun card that's like just not quite good enough to ban most of the time. But it seems like they finally have gotten sick of it in Historic and Pioneer, and maybe it'll go from older formats one day.
I mean, all their kind of rationalization for this was they wanted to lower the power level of, I think, what they saw how they saw the dominoes fall, right? And they're like, okay, removing Teferi is going to lower the power level of these Niv Delight decks, which are highly played and highly winning. And I think that it makes sense for Teferi to go if they really saw like Niv still, I guess, being a major player, even though it's going to lose Uro.
I don't think there's any reason for it to not be a major player with losing Uro. It'll be less powerful for sure, but this is a big, like, taking a lot of wind out of the sails of that deck now. So,
well, Wilderness Reclamation being banned is a big deal for Niv because that was its natural predator, I think. Yeah. And you can still bring to light for Tibalt, which is going to be a really good reason to be Niv. I mean, you lose Teferi and Uro, but I think Niv is still going to be a good Pioneer deck.
I agree. Yeah, especially because of Bring to Light and Tibalt.
I think it's okay if it's a good Pioneer deck, and paying 5 for Tibalt, I think is quite reasonable even. Right? No one wants to pay 2 or 3.
Yeah. I think going through deck building constrictions to pay 5 for Tibalt is worth it. I think if Tibalt just cost 5 mana, it would be very, very good.
I want to pat myself and Dave on the back because when we were brainstorming what the possible bans would be for today's episode.
Hey, look, I was watching Moonstruck with my wife, okay?
Snap out of it, Shane. Snap out of it.
I can't blame you. Great movie. But somehow we swung 100 in Pioneer. Didn't do quite as well for the other formats. We
did in Modern. No, we swung 100 in Modern.
Did we?
Yeah.
The only card that we talked about potentially seeing a ban in Pio that didn't happen was Valky, but we saw the Wilderness Wreck, we saw Teferi, we saw Oops decks being banned, which is kind of the next one on this list, Balustrade Spy and Undercity Informer. Look at us. The format we haven't played in maybe a year is the one that we're able to predict most accurately.
Can we talk about Balustrade Spy and Undercity Informer for, like, is that the next ones we want to talk to?
Combo?
Because, like,
the card?
Yeah, they're just one card combos, and it's wild to me that 2 cards from Gate Crash got banned. Because that set, have you looked at that set lately? Anyway, it's
high power level.
Yeah, it's just, I'm surprised that they nerfed this deck so hard, but this deck is so annoying. It's annoying in Modern. It's annoying in Pioneer. So I guess RIP, we'll see how Oops All Spells changes, because I have no doubt that the fact that someone can play a deck with no lands in it will find a way to be abused will happen again. But
yeah. Okay. We got to talk about, is this going to help Pioneer as much as we can imagine, right? And like they basically took 35% of the top of the metagame and either banned it outright or nerfed it really hard. And that is a lot of space for other decks to make room for themselves. Maybe entirely new decks to be created. I'll believe it when I see it when it comes to Pioneer. And this is going back to kind of what we talked about before with what you were saying, Evert. And like, it's about like sort of what is fun and how do they want to curate these formats. And I think Pioneer, it looks like WOTC is really trying to eliminate most combo strategies from this format, even ones that aren't particularly fast, because I think that they see eliminating combo in Pioneer as one way for them to keep this format, quote unquote, fun. But I don't know if that necessarily is going to help the format out.
I think, in my opinion, what has been bad about Pioneer is when the format gets just so stuck and solved and new decks aren't able to be viable at all because the existing top decks are just, they're solved. There's not a ton of room for innovation in them. There's like a little tiny wiggle room. And for a format like Pioneer, with like just so full of fun cards that people like and that just aren't good enough, maybe that's what's making it be not fun. Maybe not necessarily the presence of combo decks, but the combo decks, pushing the other things out from being possible. And I really hope Pioneer is good again. I would love to want to play Pioneer.
Yeah, I hope they keep banning cards until Glorybringer is good again. That's like when I was
honestly,
enjoying it.
Yeah. I think Glorybringer being a good card in Pioneer would be a good litmus test for how the format is.
Yeah, I one of the things I'll talk about later, and since we're on it now, in the dive down section, is I think what they really seem like they want to push Pioneer to the board, right? They don't want people winning through funky interactions. They don't want even like a control combo strategy or a combo strategy that takes like 5 or 6 turns to set up. Like they want people winning, I think, through creature combat or controlling creature combat and having like a win con. And I think that's their near-term goal for how they want to shape Pioneer based on the last bannings and these bannings. I think that's kind of the way we see things going.
I think you're onto something. I might phrase it that Wizards wants to see traditional archetypes represented in Pioneer. So aggro, mid-range control, ramp combo, and then like a healthy diversity between them. Not necessarily just playing to the board, but I do think you're onto that. I think you're onto something with that.
Yeah, I think it's a better way to say it for sure.
But is there any combo left? Is it just
there's still Lotus Field combo? From what I understand, that deck is still playable. There you could play Aetherworks Marvel now that Teferi is banned potentially. That was definitely always felt like the card that was keeping Aetherworks Marvel at bay was Teferi Time Raveler because its static shut off its ability.
Wow, there's a call. That's a great point.
So yeah, I think there are probably some combo decks.
1,000-Year Storm.
But we'll see how good they are. Oh no. Oh no.
The one last thing I'll say about Pio is I think the format needs more than bans to get popular and exciting again. I think it needs some top-down support in terms of incentivized attendance for Pioneer events.
I think a Horizon set specifically cultivated to make Pioneer exactly what they want it to be. Or maybe just what you said, printing Innistrad. That sounds like what Pioneer needs. I think you're exactly right. I would play Pioneer probably for a month if they put Innistrad in it, and that just sounds so exciting and fun to me. And Innistrad is like a super well loved set, and the power level of those cards feel honestly just about right. And I'd be down.
Yeah, Faithless Looting. Never heard anybody.
Yeah. Faithless Looting would be fine in Pioneer, maybe. Don't hold me to that.
So like you want like an anthology, even maybe not even not a
that
full.
Would be good. That
full
would be
Masters.
Good. Yeah, I think that would be very good for Pioneer.
I mean, the other thing is if they actually stick to their word and put Pioneer on Arena, you're just going to have access to a bigger player base. And if they do Arena opens for Pioneer, or those, random weekend events.
And maybe that will be what I was talking about. The next year, Pioneer will be good again.
Yeah.
That will be when it happens. And it'll be Pi-storic.
I'm just imagining playing Faithless Looting with Treasure Cruise and Pioneer and Is It Phoenix right now and just going like...
Well, that's the thing is there aren't that many other good 1-mana spells. You don't have as many, the density of cantrips. You don't have Manamorphose. You don't have Lava Dart.
Totally.
Yeah, it might be fun.
All right. So final thoughts on this whole thing.
Yeah.
We feel excited. I feel excited. It's been a long year.
Yeah,
I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in Magic and the formats that we pay attention to in the last 12 months, even without paper play. And there's been good times, there's been bad times, but I feel like they put some effort into kind of like correcting some stuff right now, especially when it comes to Modern, in my mind. So,
is Modern what you're most excited about, Dave?
Definitely. I mean, I haven't paid attention to Pioneer a long time. I've still enjoyed Modern because the deck that I enjoy the most is mostly intact over the last 6 months. And then Historic, I enjoy, and it'll be good to see Uro gone. At least I think it'll be good to see Uro gone there. We'll see what happens. But
yeah, I mean, it's a pretty significant ban announcement in Modern and Pioneer, and maybe like a mildly interesting tweak to Historic.
I don't remember this many cards in a single banned announcement ever. No, I could be wrong, but
that was, I mean, that's my question I wanted to talk about a little bit, is like, do you think this is the biggest Modern shakeup? Perhaps since like Oko, Opal, Lattice, or maybe even like Twin Bloom? Like Twin Summer Bloom was a lot.
I feel like Twin Summer Bloom was a big one, but there was also like Faithless Looting, Hogak banned, Stoneforge unbanned. Just looting being banned was
looting to SFM was a lot. Yeah.
I just like Faithless Looting was the best card in Modern for so long, and it just like, I feel like looting being banned was what allowed, you know, the rise of blue decks to some extent, and then also a lot of good blue cards being printed helped. I don't know that this is going to be the biggest shakeup, but it definitely feels like one of the biggest ones, and maybe time will tell.
Yeah, the one thing I wish is that they didn't just shoehorn 10 announcements into a single article and have to give us sort of abridged explanations for all of them. And maybe they could have put out 4 or 5 articles in a day. Maybe they could have like spread this out over the weekend or something like that. But I want to hear more about their philosophies for these formats. I know that's something people talk about a lot, is sort of this curatorial transparency. They hinted at their vision for Pioneer by making it a greatest hits of Standard, but do they have visions for Historic and Modern? Are there cards that they still have in their crosshairs as things to watch in some of these other formats? You know, it's probably wishful thinking, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll get in a tweet one day, but what makes certain best of one decks okay, like Neoform or Tibalt's Trickery? What makes Muxus okay in best of 3? These are some of my hanging thread questions that I'd love to get an answer to one day, but I don't think it's really in their nature anymore to provide that amount of transparency unless they're really pushed.
I don't think that they can have super hard, strict rules and philosophies for ban announcements anymore. It's just data gets processed so fast, weird quarter cases come up, things that are usually subjective become, you know, not so subjective. And I do think that they probably have more defined ideas of what they want to be doing with the ban list behind the scenes. But as soon as they announce what those ideals are, you'll get just a million people rules lawyering and complaining, why did you ban this? This wasn't exactly what you said you were going to do with the ban list, even though new things will come up and then they'll think they'll need to go against their guidelines. So that's my opinion, at least on the matter.
Rules lawyers ruining the game again.
All right, so we know what everybody really is tuned in for here, though, is they want to know what we think is going to happen. And so we're going to take a little break, and the next section we are going to hop over into talking about what we think are some winners and losers in each format. Maybe beyond the obvious ones, if we can. Stay with us. All right, so what we thought would be fun for the next section here is some called shots, right? I don't know if we even need, we were going to talk about winners and losers. We went a little long in the breakdown section. I don't know if we need to talk about losers. People know the decks that are losing pieces, unless there's some second level stuff that people want to talk about that they think is interesting.
Yeah, the tertiary.
We're going to start with Modern, right? Like I'm all for that, but we're going to start with Modern. Let's talk about decks that we think are winners in Modern right now, and then we can go back to the unobvious losers later. And I want to start with Stan.
Okay, thanks. So every good deck from the last year or two of Modern that hasn't seen a ban is probably a winner. Specifically,
Yep. The decks that got cards banned get worse, and the decks that didn't get cards banned get better.
This is a great rule of thumb.
End of podcast.
We should put that on the next playmat. So people are talking about Shadow. I think Shane's going to talk about Shadow. But if Shadow gets popular, I can see Etron getting a little more popular because now Etron becomes perhaps the premier Chalice deck.
I think definitely the premier Chalice deck.
Yeah, I think both Shadow/Prowess decks, because the best Shadow deck is Red-Black, and Red-Black is really a Prowess deck. I do think that those decks get better, and I also do think Eldrazi Tron is a playable deck again, because they don't have to die as quickly all the time, constantly.
It's really the 3-drop that does it. Mana Reshaper. You can't stop Mana Reshaper.
Whenever someone casts Mana Reshaper on turn 2 against me on stream, I'll always right-click and just hover over Concede and out-complain and go on a tangent about how Wizards is in their power creep.
That's funny. I usually just have a big sigh of relief whenever they play that card against me. Maybe it's not the right thing to do, but I'm usually like, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Rakdos Shadow versus Etron matchup and trying to figure out what does Etron do about a resolved Scourge of the Skyclave, because that seems like probably in Prowess's favor now.
Mazemind Tome can maybe kill it because it gets to gain 4 life. That's probably an interesting angle. Mana Reshaper blocking is interesting as well. Karn can get Ensnaring Bridge. Okay. It's pretty deadly though. But, it's pretty
maybe
deadly.
The little Ugin can destroy it too.
Yeah.
So another called shot. I think Ponza becomes a great choice again. And there was a time, even when Uro was legal, where Ponza was a tier 1 deck.
Yeah.
And it fell out of favor a little bit, but I don't see why a turn 2 Blood Moon or a turn 2 Chandra would get suddenly worse in this new environment.
I think that if like Elder Gargaroths or whatever aggro deck is popular, if Ponza can figure out a reasonable plan against that, I agree with you. But if the popular aggro decks are like Blue-Red Prowess or Humans, I think that Ponza's probably gonna struggle, because whenever I played Ponza in the past, it was just like Humans and like the fast Prowess decks always felt so miserable to fight against.
What do you think about Hammer right now? Because my concern is that when we lose like the Uro Omnath style decks, and we maybe have a rise of traditional sort of black based disruptive hand disruption removal pile type decks, and I'm curious if Hammer is going to be able to hold its strength where it is now, or if it will sort of get worse in that sense. I'm not
I think
sure.
Hammer Time is great. I think Hammer Time is a really good deck, and I think that it got better with the announcement.
Got better. Wow, that's interesting.
I think Hammer Time's underrated, honestly. Even though it was crushing tournaments, I think Hammer Time can grind way more than people think it can.
Yeah, it definitely can.
Yeah, I think that the really good Hammer Time players can play around interaction in a really challenging way to beat, and I could see that someone just picking it up and mastering it in the same way you can like pick up and master Amulet Titan and just really just play around permission. And I think Hammer Time is going to be a big deck going forward. And I do think this, but there's aggro decks I think are going to be really good. I think the format is going to be immediately defined by aggro decks, at least for the next month or two. And those aggro decks are going to be Humans, Red-Black Shadow, Blue-Red Prowess, maybe the weird Mono-Red Prowess decks, and then potentially Hammer Time as well. And so then you're going to have mid-range and control decks trying to evolve that are beating up on those decks while also trying to hedge against the big mana Tron, the Titan decks, the fast combo deck of choice, which is going to be Oops All Spells. Potentially Dredge is going to show up every once in a while. And this is what I anticipate the format looking like. And I think that seems like a pretty reasonable place to be. Also, Green-White Heliod is great and probably good against almost all of the things I just listed.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the one thing that's definitely... I mean, there's a bunch of decks that are on my radar, but I was thinking Green-White feels like it's poised for a lot of comeback.
I think it's immediately the best deck. You can probably beat it, but it just seems like the best choice in an unknown metagame right
Evert,
now.
wouldn't you agree that it's now the deck to beat in Modern?
Maybe. I actually feel like the deck to beat is aggro decks in general.
Yeah.
And so and that's why I like Heliod so much, because it does beat the aggro decks so well, and then also is good against everything really. or has game, I should say.
I mean, I keep going back to Rakdos Death Shadow, and I'm like, what is this deck not doing? Like, it's going to have hand disruption for maybe some key pieces of decks like, let's say, Hammer Time. Like, maybe they're like, hey, I'm going to strip out your Mana Cheater, your Sigarda's Aid or whatever, and then I'm going to put a clock on you. And that can do that to decks like, various Titan-style decks where, turn 2 or turn 3 Thoughtseize can do a lot of work, potentially, if they're really relying on the Titan they have in hand. You clock people really well, like I said. I don't know what's so bad about Rakdos Death Shadow where it's not going to be a tier 1 contender.
Stormwing Entity is what's so bad about it. And so that's kind of the interesting dynamic is red blue prowess and red black prowess, which is red black scourge, have this really interesting tension where they can't ever deal with Stormwing Entity ever unless they Thoughtseize it, but Thoughtseize is kind of bad against them if they don't take exactly Stormwing Entity.
Okay.
But and it also loses to infinite life, but they have interaction. I think it's very interesting. I think red black is going to be great, but the deck does have weaknesses. One bad thing about Scourge was your opponent just sometimes killed your Scourge by casting an Uro and you lost the game.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I will say I think that the funnel on Shadow is going to open up some too, where I think that a lot of people were like, Liliana the Veil got unbanned today, Tarmogoyf got unbanned today. Like, a lot of people are having that kind of take on the bannings, but I do think that Jund Shadow is good, potentially, again, just be able to bring Tarmogoyf back into the deck could be a really good way to go as well, because suddenly you have a threat that's pretty big for cheap, and it's one of the bigger ones for cheap, and you also get to run Scourge and Death Shadow, and so I feel like that style of deck could come back. It's a style of Shadow that I really like to play a lot. I was going to say, while we're talking about aggro decks, of course, I am thrilled that blue-red prowess is probably pretty good still right now and will continue to be, and didn't lose anything, and I'm looking forward to that continuing. It's my favorite deck. So
I think Monastery Swiftspear is the best creature in Modern right now.
We have a Slack member, Abe, I think, maybe,
it was Kyle.
Kyle was like, Monastery Swiftspear should have been on the ban list, with full seriousness.
You know what? Kyle may prove to be way wiser than all of us. Swiftspear, I think, was already the best creature in Modern for whatever that's worth.
I agree.
I think that it was already better than every other creature in the format, Uro and Spirit Guide included.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that. I think Swiftspear is just nuts. But the thing is, it's like in your Swiftspear decks, you have to play all these other threats that are not as good as Monastery Swiftspear is the issue. And so it's like, you can either build your deck to be slower and grindier for these threats, or you can, maximize some of these nut draws. I don't know. I'm kind of getting off,
but still
off point a bit. Yeah.
What we are saying though is that any deck that's running Swiftspear has a good chance to be ascendant right now, right? Whether that's Burn, whether that's blue-red prowess, whether it's red-black prowess Shadow. I totally agree with that. It's very hard to compete with a 1-mana spell that has haste and prowess. Always good. I mean, the drop off, when you really think about it, just think about the drop off from Soulscar Mage to Swiftspear. Just think about it. It's huge, and it's really just all about the haste.
So if I'm reading between the lines, though, Ever, you kind of make it sound like you're not going to play Control for a minute.
Oh, I'm going to play Control constantly. It's going to be awesome. No, I said that, maybe I kind of glossed over it. I do think mid-range and Control decks can adapt in this environment. I think that Jeskai Control with Cleansing Wildfire and Flagstones, potentially my favorite deck in Modern, which is the Blood Sun, Lotus Field, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria deck. I played it today. It felt okay.
All right.
Maybe that could be real. I think the Bant Ephemerate Control deck or Soul Herder decks can rise to prominence. People are going to play Blue-White. People are going to play Jund. Those decks are going to be medium, as always. I think there will be good Control decks. There will be Control decks that people play. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be one of those people. I think that we're going to find a metagame that's targetable, which is where Control decks shine.
Right. Can we talk about one shadow elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet?
The big shadowy elephant?
Grixis? Yeah, the big green shadow, which is Primeval Titan. Like, what about Primeval Titan in this meta? Because I actually originally was kind of like, I feel like Titan has an up arrow next to it after this, even though it loses field.
Yeah. It's weird because Titan got a big nerf in losing field, but I agree that I think Titan gets to go back to the Amulet Titan variants, and I think honestly the biggest thing that makes Titan good is the Mystic Sanctuary ban. I think it's very subtle, but I just always felt like if I had Mystic Sanctuary in my deck and Aether Gust, I had a good Titan matchup.
Absolutely.
Just putting Aether Gust back on top of Sanctuary was a really good way to beat them, and like just that interaction is what led to the Reclaimer Titan deck being built to beat up on that interaction. And I think that the Titan players are probably happy to sacrifice Field of the Dead for Sanctuary in order to make their Amulet Titan deck reasonable again.
Yeah, and I feel like too, I mean, they're totally okay going on Valakut as the win con. You know, if you want to go that way instead of Amulet, you can still go that way, and you can play Scape Shift again, which I think could be decent in certain, depending on how the meta kind of turns out. I mean, if there's a bunch of like counterspell decks, it's harder to Scape Shift, but you know, I feel like there's a lot of power there still too.
Yeah, there's a million different directions you can go.
Part of me even thinks that Scape Shift, Titan Shift specifically, gets better because of Dryad as well. Like you don't have to.
You can't run on mountains.
Exactly, you don't have to fetch quite as carefully because all of your lands are hits for Valakut now.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is because of Dryad. Yeah. I don't know. Classic Titan Shift has got this weird tension where Dryad in play makes your deck great. And you really want to play Castle Garenbrig to cast your Primeval Titans, but then if your Dryad dies, obviously your deck can fall apart pretty easily, from what I can gather. But maybe I feel like there was like a little while ago where Titan Shift was making a bit of a resurgence, and I'm like, why is this deck being played? It's so much worse than the other Titan decks, and I just kept losing to it. So
there
might be something there. Yeah.
Okay, so are there any unobvious losers, do you think?
We haven't talked much about Adnaz. I know that was kind of like we pour one out. A lot of we have some friends in the Slack who have been building like foil Adnaz. So pour one out for Jason.
Yeah, Adnaz can no longer cast Lightning Storm off of Simian Spirit Guides, which was a very important access for them to get the kill, in addition to Thassa's Oracle. So Thassa's Oracle might now be the win con that they have to lean into.
Yeah, this might now be a Spoils of the Vault Thassa's Oracle Angel's Grace combo deck that people play because they have the cards, and is probably going to be a worse combo deck than a lot of other strategies, but is maybe something worth considering. And maybe you still play one copy of Ad Nauseam to Spoils of the Vault 4 when you have exactly Angel's Grace, but you don't have the other two pieces of your combo. Although that wouldn't be true if you have Spoils. Yeah, if you have Angel's Grace Spoils, you can Spoils for Ad Nauseam, draw your deck, and if you have enough mana, you can Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah. Now, the deck I did see, there was a deck circulating around the Slack and also on Twitter today already that is SSG-less Adnaz that has Risk the Redeemer and double Mox Amber to be able to perform as Simian Spirit Guides for the mana you need to cast it. You draw your whole deck.
So it taps for green or white, and then you can Pentad Prism into Thassa's Oracle.
Correct. Yeah, and that's deterministic with Adnaz still. So I don't know if that's the package. I still think that those cards are good, guys. I'm not an Adnaz player, but like figuring out I feel like there's a way to make it work okay, but it might just be slower.
Maybe. I agree. I think that is a very creative solution. I think that there are possibly other creative solutions out there to look for. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Right. What do we think about for some of these other non-interactive combo decks, like Oops All Spells in Modern?
That's the best one. That's the best one, I think. That one still very consistently kills on turn 3. Play a Mana Rock on turn 2, play a Balustrade Spy or Undercity Informer on turn 3. Very, very consistently going to happen. The deck probably just plays more main deck interaction, like discard spells, and maybe a little more Mana Rocks. And is going to fold to Graveyard Hate, but then you can play Belchers in the sideboard. You can play Answers to Graveyard Hate. You have a lot of game against Graveyard Hate, and so I think that Oops All Spells is going to be the premier fast glass cannon combo deck. Belcher and Oops All Spells and Tibalt's Trickery all got much worse. I don't think that Oops All Spells got enough worse that it's I think it's going to reign supreme.
How about Prison? How bad do we feel about Mono Red Prison?
That deck has not been good in years.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's much worse without Spirit Guide.
Yeah, much worse.
But honestly, I really feel like that deck never had good matchups. Is how I felt about it for a long time.
Do you think Cryptic Command can still see play in a world without Mystic Sanctuary?
Yes, but it's worse.
Yeah.
It's still a playable card, I think, and Snapcaster Mage gets a bit better too.
I mean, I saw you playing it today.
Yeah, I think Snapcaster is good. I also think Cryptic Command is still good in specifically the Bant Ephemerate control deck, because you get to loop it with your Ephemerate and Eternal Witness, and I'm very excited for that. And yeah, I think it's a playable card. I think that Cryptic Command was unplayable during the Faithless Looting era, when your opponents were, just spewing a million power into play early, and then Cryptic Command was just 4-mana fog.
Yeah.
But that's not the format we live in anymore. You don't have like 4 or 5, decks that are just getting so much recursive value from the graveyard, and Cryptic lines up so poorly against them. I think Cryptic is still a reasonable card to be on.
A couple other decks that I think got hit with today's ban: Electro Balance. Without Simian, Spirit Guide can no longer cast turn 1 Rhinos.
Oh no.
I thought that Electro Balance was going to quietly be great, but I found out I was wrong today. I thought that you could Valky off of Electro Balance, and as foretold, I double checked today on Magic Online, and you actually can't. But I thought it was going to be like a secret winner, but it's not, for everybody who was secretly thinking the same thing as I was.
And likewise, Neo Brand, I don't think they can do turn 1 Neo forms anymore without Simian Spirit Guide.
Yeah. That deck's dead, I think. I hope. I mean, it can maybe also play Mox Amber, right? If you get Gristlebrand in play, they tap for black, and if you can convert that mana into a Lab Maniac somehow, maybe it's still just a deck.
But can you get Gristlebrand in play on turn 1 without the ape?
Chancellor of the Tangle lets you, but the deck's much worse for sure.
That's not a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I felt like Neobrand has been terrorizing anyone recently too badly.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah.
One question I had for you, Evert, is because you have a little bit, ongoing experience that we don't with Modern. Do you think there were decks that were capitalizing on the Uro meta that you think are going to have more predators now? Like, what is maybe a loser that people aren't thinking about? And if there's not, no problem.
I don't really think that there is. There's like a couple of fringe decks, and it's honestly a little hard to even think about because the last 2 weeks have been dominated by Valky, and so I haven't really been in that format. But there's like the red-black mid-range deck that was Jund dropping the green, playing Magmatic Channeler, main deck Blood Moons, and that deck was around to beat up on the Uro decks and also be kind of metagamed for like the low to the ground aggro decks. And so that deck is maybe still playable, but I think it's worse. The Jeskai Lotus Field deck that I really like and is, a little slow in the format, but that deck did beat up on Uro decks, and even though no card got banned from it, it did, I think, get worse because it's, the decks it was trying to prey on is no longer there, but that's just kind of like a fringe brew that I have and I like rather than a real deck in the metagame. Besides like the red-black mid-range deck, I think like the decks that were kind of preying on the Uro strategies were, blue-red prowess specifically, or like the mono-red prowess decks. Some Hammer Time players felt like they had good Uro matchups, and I think all of those decks are still going to be good.
Sure. Yeah. Shall we move on to Historic and Pioneer so we can breeze through these in the time we have left?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, Historic. Winners in Historic. I have a hard time with this because I think statistically, like I said, Sultai isn't really that great of a deck. But the main thing that Sultai was able to beat up on were slower control decks, interestingly, like Blue-White and Bant control. And I think that Blue-White is going to see a big uptick in play as like the controlling strategy du jour. But I'm not really sure how control decks in the card pool of Historic can't run, like, let's say Thoughtseize or the ultra efficient black removal that the other colors don't really get to touch on. So yeah, I guess like my winners list is like slow decks that couldn't keep up with Sultai's value engine and didn't have the speed to beat them down. So like the control decks perhaps, but also even stuff like there's a lot of versions of this deck, but the one that I'm thinking of is basically like the creature based green white company deck. It's kind of like a big mid-range deck. And that is something that's been giving Gruul aggro a big headache. And that's a popular deck.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying a minute ago that this is the one that can run Yasharn in it, potentially. And
exactly, it does, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that because it has game against Raxac, this is a place that I think more and more people will go to. You know, it's good against Raxac. It's good against Gruul because its creatures are bigger and they come out on curve.
Yeah, it's just a little bit slower, and Sultai could eat it alive, but I don't think it can't anymore. But I don't think it really hits the true best decks in this format, and so like I think it just changes what a mid-range deck in Historic looks like. So like the value game is different. It's not Growth Spiral and Uro any longer. But it wasn't that great in the first place.
I'm also not sure that it's not.
Yeah.
Because
Growth Spiral is good.
People still want to get to Nissa.
Yes, like Krasis, Nissa, Elder Gargaroth, Vorinclex.
And a main deck full of removal spells. So like Extinction Event and Eliminate piles and even Faithless Suiting and main deck Thoughtseizes. I think that's enough ways to stall out a game too until you get to Nissa or Vorinclex or Gargaroth.
I mean, there's just a really big Uro-shaped hole in this deck. And I don't know if Historic has the card pool to fill that in. And I'm curious what like mid-range looks like. I hope that it's good. I mean, we have the Arcanist style strategy. I think it's kind of like the default mid-long value engine deck now, and I think that's fine. I think that's a cool deck.
Yeah, the only things I would add there, going back and forth on goblins a little bit, on the one hand, I felt like Sultai started to prey on goblins because of all that removal and main deck sweepers, but I'm also not even convinced that goblins can keep up with Historic right now, just because the only thing that I think is good about goblins is when you're able to actually land a Muxus that hits. And I'm just not seeing goblins put up the type of results that it used to, both in my own hands and as well as the general results I see on Goldfish for a bunch of Historic events. And then basically to echo Shane's point, like this green-white company deck, I play it a lot, especially when I'm on Arcanist. And maybe that's when I notice it the most, because what's the 1/1 white?
The 1/1 white which card?
1 white spirit.
Oh, Skyclave Apparition?
Thank you. Yeah, Apparition just hoses the Arcanist deck so much because it answers Kroxa. It deals with all of the creatures really elegantly. So, yeah.
Card is just super good. I mean, it's poised to become even more important in Modern, I think. And it's really good in Historic. It's going to become even more important in Historic as well. So, I mean, you pair that together with Luminarch Aspirant to get things bigger and Yasharn and like all that. I think that deck is really good. It's a deck that I've been putting off crafting for a long time, and I think now is the time for me to get it, even though I have Raxac, because I'd like to have some game against Raxac on Arena. So
I think the real issue is how prevalent will control decks be, because I still don't think that this deck can put a clock down that's fast enough to deal with wraths and removal spells and bounce spells and counter spells, because just the speed at which that deck operates just a little bit slower than the most aggressive decks. So you know what that usually means. You're going to lose.
You think Company's too slow for control?
Oh yeah, I think Green White Company is likely too slow for control if control's good enough to win.
Company's just a big counter target, so
I don't know what looking at the bottom 6 cards of your library is going to help you do against control decks.
Explain the joke.
Why are we looking at the bottom? Oh, because they run
Coco.
Because they run Cage.
Because Coco always whiffs.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying Coco
Oh yeah.
whiffs.
Oh yeah, because you put them back on the bottom. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh god, it sure does.
This joke didn't land. It's fine.
It's still good.
A for effort.
Yeah.
The A in Aspiringspike.
We're all about jokes that don't land here, so it's all good.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, like the real thing is, I think we have to wait and see on Historic what's going to happen there. I think the format's still pretty good. I think it's pretty top heavy, but I'm hopeful that more will happen with it.
No one cares about the decks that me just loving a deck, but I don't think this affects auras one way or the other, honestly. So it's just kind of like it's probably still the same deck it was right now.
I think Auras is good against control for whatever that's worth. And so if control decks somehow are able to beat the sacrifice decks and this green, white, and Gruul deck, and like maybe sideboard for goblins, maybe like main deck a bunch of Tails in for goblins, maybe Auras is in a good spot.
We will see. It's been decent still, but sacrifice is going to be a problem for that if it goes that way.
Yeah.
Okay, Pioneer.
Yeah, like it's like doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what's good.
I mean, what do we think are dark horses to be good in Pioneer? Like, what are you excited to try out again, Evert?
The green horse with mono green planeswalkers forever.
That was like one of the best decks and didn't get touched, and everything else around it got touched.
My favorite deck in Pioneer has always been Mono Blue Devotion with Leyline of Anticipation.
Yeah, that deck's sweet.
I love that deck so much, and I think like the last 2 times Pioneer's gotten a shakeup, I've played like a league and gone 2-3 and not continued, and I'll probably do that again. I don't know. That's the thing. It's like I want to play Pioneer. Mm-hmm. There are decks in Pioneer I have liked in the past, but I don't currently really want to play it, and I hope that changes. But that's just not where I'm at the moment, I guess.
I think if you like creature-based games and just sort of like, you know, traditional sort of Magic, then I think Pioneer's pretty solid. You know, if when you cut off the 35% of the metagame in the single ban announcement, all the other decks like Spirits, Burn, Mono Black Vampires, Auras, Feather, that's all the stuff that's going to fill in the void of this meta. And I'm curious, like, you know, I'm of course like you, like, oh, let's just play Mono Green Planeswalkers. That deck already rules.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that one of the things that can, in my opinion, prey on that deck is aggression. And so we have a bunch of aggressive decks ready to come in and try to stomp on Planeswalkers before Planeswalkers can get set up.
So you should play Elder Gargaroth in your main deck if you're worried about an aggressive metagame as your Planeswalkers.
When that card resolves, it's just like any creature deck is just like, well, poop.
Yeah.
What do I do now?
So that's my recommendation to the Planeswalkers players in the chat, you know.
Yeah, so that's like my way of saying like winner. I think the loser is ultimately might be Planeswalkers because it's going to have a target on its back, and like winners is like everything else because everything else is just going to sort of fill in the gaps.
I will say, as far as everything else goes, Feather has been getting some reasonable results lately in the Pioneer challenges, and so, you know, it's a deck that has Swift Spear in it. It's the type of deck I like to play, and
yeah, that deck is cool.
I think it's good, and
cool.
I think that there's a chance that it'll get better without Uro being around anymore to mess with it and all the other cards. So I think there's a chance that could come back. And then other than that, like I said earlier, I would really love to see some kind of red mid-rangey deck come back. I don't know if it's going to happen, but
something of the chunky variety.
Yeah, I always like Spirits in this format too. I think the Spirits deck is very close to the same cards that are in Modern, or at least cards that are so close to being the same that it's good. I mean, obviously it doesn't have Aether Vial, stuff like that, but I think Spirits is always positioned to be like right there in Pioneer, so I could see that happening as well.
Maybe a Goldspan Dragon is better than Glorybringer, and can, you know, if you want to play a red aggressive deck, maybe play Goldspan Dragon, the one that attacks and makes
these guys tokens. Are not believing in that card, and I had that on our spoiler episode, Evert.
Oh, that card is Nissa and Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. The more I think about it, it's just the 3-mana.
You just have to have something to do with that mana.
Yeah. I mean, same thing for Nissa and Teferi. You got to have something to do with the mana, but when you do, it's great. You know, when your 5-drop costs 3, it's just those are the best 5-drops ever printed. So I do believe in the card, and it can also be a 1-drop, right? If somehow you have a 4-mana instant and your opponent targets your Goldspan Dragon with removal spell, and you have Commit to Memory or Cryptic Command, that's not necessarily true because they'll kill it before you attack with it, unless they kill it on their turn with a sorcery speed removal spell. They're just like a lot of upside.
Stan, you looked like I was attacking you there for a minute, but you did not look like Goldspan Dragon. Am I right?
Well, maybe not in the spoilers, but then when LFC's is it control deck and standard popped off. I crafted the gold spans in Arena because I had the rest of the deck and had a ball with that for a few weeks.
Oh, there you go.
So now I kind of like it.
Okay.
Gold span plus negate feels really cool.
Yes.
Like just crazy cool.
Stan, I felt that you have always been the person who's dabbled in Pioneer next to me. What are you thinking about Pioneer, though, before we close this section out?
This is going to be the Stanislav parody account hour, but I think Ensol is back. Just because one of the problems
Another aggressive deck.
Exactly, yeah. 5/5
with
indestructibles, really good. You have some main deck interaction, and so I did a few Pioneer FNMs with the Dive Down Nation, and the worst deck that I would always face off was just anything with Uro, because Uro would stall that, and it would make it really hard for you to close after a really explosive start. So I think without Uro, if there's nothing else in the format that can like stall the board by gaining that much life, I think Ensol could be at the top of tier 2.
And no Teferi is a big deal too, since like they can just bounce your Darksteel Citadel.
That's also true. And then the last thing I'll point out is Pioneer is like the only format that I have not noticed elves adopt new cards from Kaldheim. And we're even seeing elves in Modern. The Modern champs had an elves deck in the top 32.
Oh yeah, elves is good. I don't think we talked about that at all, but I've been playing it a little bit off stream and having fun. Elves is just a playable deck, I think, with Warmaster, or is it Warcaller? The
Warmaster,
Elvish
Warmaster,
and then Realm Walker. Realm Walker is the truth.
Realm Walker just like snowballs like crazy. I think Pioneer is missing some of the mana engines that we have in Modern.
Yeah. No Archdruid or Heritage Druid is like a big loss.
Yeah, I wonder if Marwyn the Nurturer can like maybe help fill that gap. But my point is basically in Pioneer, I just think a turn 2 Steel Age champion deck that has Warmaster that can eventually then flood the board with a bunch of tokens and then pump them without having to play like end race forerunners could be a shell for elves in this format. I also noticed the last Pioneer League had a mono blue deck that costs all of 3 tickets that trophied.
What?
The only card in it that costs a ticket is basically the Aether Gust in the sideboard.
Wow.
What was in this deck? Was it like Tempest Djinn style mono blue kind of stuff?
Tempest Djinn, Sea-Dash, Octopus, Spectral Sailor.
It was just the historic-y kind of deck. That's great. I have been playing that deck in Historic lately still and having fun with it.
Same.
Yeah.
So frustrating to face down sometimes.
Yeah, when they have a good hand, you just can't do anything. They have counter spells every turn. They're drawing like 3 cards a turn.
I just can't believe there's a counter spell that's legitimate because it has a pirate tax.
Yeah, pirate beak. Pirate leak. So we've gone through the formats. We got our winners and losers. Here's what I would like to ask. We were going to do this as a wind down before, but I don't want to put in a break here. What do you guys think about the fact that a lot of the decks that we just rattled off were our favorite decks? Like, we see possibilities for our favorite decks right now. Mm-hmm. It just feels like that's some bias, or do you just think it's kind of like, wow, we see a lot of possibilities in all these formats right now because of what just happened? What do you think?
Probably a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. You know, you start to like a deck because at some point it's good, you know. I think it's pretty rare to ever like a deck because it's you never win a game with it. And, you know, we don't play chess, you know. We don't play chess. You get attached to decks, you like them. It is hard to remove that bias forever.
You know, a wise man once said on Twitter, "Yes, viewer, the Uro ban does make your pet deck better."
Yeah, that was my official
That was
statement
funny. I forgot that he said that, but yeah, I forgot you said that. Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the fact that we're all kind of like, hey, you can do the things that you like again now, at least for the next couple of months, and we'll see what happens. It doesn't feel like there's anything else coming from... look, Kaldheim messed a bunch of stuff up that we didn't quite think was going to mess it up as bad as it did. You know, like I think we all knew that you could cascade into Valky. I don't think we all quite realized what was going to happen in the metagame because you could cascade into Valky. But with that being over, for example, it does feel like there's not other surprises lurking in that set. So we might have some time to do the stuff that we like to do. And hopefully with Uro being gone, the decks that play answers will have to become more creative And so that means that there'll be more possibilities for people to do other things. And I feel like that applies across a lot of formats.
I've always thought it was good when mid-range and control decks can choose to beat anything, but not everything. And so you can gear your answers towards any specific archetype or deck for a given weekend, but you can't beat Eldrazi Tron and Hammer Time and Shadow and Oops All Spells and Blue-Red Storm and Dredge. You know, you get to pick what you want to beat on a weekend, and you can't beat all of it. And I think that that's what Modern's going to look like, and I think that that's a good thing.
So the reason we had this episode is because of a big, massive shakeup in all of our favorite formats. But I feel like we need to just take a minute to kind of talk about why this keeps happening.
Yeah.
Because we're both getting a little callous to bans, but also just yearning for them every 3 months, it feels like.
It's kind of brutal. It's I wonder how long that it's going to go on without actually losing the casual spike. You know what I mean? I think the casual spike is perhaps at most risk here, right? In terms of losing interest in Magic. One, because their incomes or their livelihoods or their entire social circle, you know, not that every competitive player is like that, but I think a lot of competitive players, a lot is wrapped up in being a competitive player. And the casual spike, I think, is someone who likes being able to maybe spend some cash, build a collection, play a few different decks, maybe get good at, you know, really good at one deck or foil out their deck. And all of a sudden Simian Spirit Guide is printed and you lose your all of your foil ad nauseum. And you're like, well, what do I do now? Like, do I move into something else? Like, do I try to get good at something else? And I think that there is a type of player that engages in the game in a certain way that won't put up with the semi, you know, quote unquote, rotating, non-rotating formats that we have dedicated this podcast to. And that's a concern for me, for sure. Is like, why does this keep happening? And is it something that WOTC cares about avoiding? And is it need to be avoided? Or is this just kind of the way we need to think about the game right now?
So for my part, I fall a little bit into like the latter thing that you said there. Because I think realistically what we're experiencing right now is the transition between two different eras of card design occurring. And two different eras of philosophy coming from WOTC about how the game should be. And there's lots of motivations for how they're thinking it should be, for why they're making this decision. But this idea of how can we reduce some of the variance in Magic is what we're experiencing over and over and over again with a lot of these bans, right? It's like the London Mulligan is a contributor to this whole thing because it makes us being able to draw our cards more consistent. Overall, it makes it feel like there's more games when you do that, but it leads to things that are bad being extra bad. Additionally, double face cards are things that are supposed to help people get through variants so they have more games because you get to choose which side you want to cast so you still feel like you're doing something. You know, all of these cards are sort of like them trying to reduce variance in the game a little bit. I don't even think they're trying to reduce it a lot. They're just trying to make it feel like there are less things where someone literally doesn't get to do anything. And paradoxically, when those cards interact with older formats, it creates more situations where people don't get to do anything because of the different philosophies of the rules at the different points in time. And I think it's going to keep happening for a bit, especially when you look at Modern. I think that there are just rules that are powerful and rules that will be exploited by the new card designs that they want to do. And if they have to go through and keep cleaning it up, I hope they do, because I do think that ultimately the goal of making more games feel like fun games is the right fun interactive games, I should say, is the right place to be. And it's probably more appealing to a broader set of people than just doing really powerful stuff.
Fun, interactive, replayable, and exciting. I think you put it super well, Dave. I think you did a great job.
Is that what FIRE stands for, Evart? Fun, interactive, replayable, and exciting?
Yeah, that's FIRE. Yeah.
Wow.
That's why I laughed. It's like people rally against FIRE design, but I think the fundamentals of what they're actually going for is good, right?
Yeah, I will say the last 2 years have been my favorite years of Magic. I know that's maybe not a popular opinion, and maybe I'm biased because I've had a ton of fun over on Twitch, but I've really, really liked Magic the last 2 years, and like things need to change sometimes, and we go through ban lists, and it feels so bad to have your deck banned, and I've had decks banned. It's a kind of a rite of passage. And things have not been perfect, but they've been fun, at least for me. And I know fun is subjective. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what matters to me, is Magic is still fun. And I think everybody needs to figure out what matters to them in the game. If that's fun, what does fun mean to them? And I'll say that while there have been a lot of design mistakes, I've been really happy with how Wizards has cultivated specifically the modern ban list in the last 2 years. I think every announcement since the looting, like starting with the looting ban and the Stoneforge unban, I've liked every part of every decision that's been made. Some of them have been maybe a little slow, but I've been a big fan of how they've cultivated the ban list. And I think that mistakes are just going to happen. That's going to be part of the game. That's like just the nature of the type of game that we're into. And I think just hoping that Wizards can rectify the mistake with bans and keep the game fun and flowing is about all you can hope for. I think hoping for perfection as far as design goes is just not something that's going to happen. And you can definitely hope that they do better, and I hope that they learn from their mistakes, and that's what I do hope. But I think a lot of players have like unreasonable expectations. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, all of this is through the filter of endless content now, right? Like everybody in Magic is a content creator. Like it's part of being a player now is to have some platform where you put content out there as well for people to share, like whatever. And so it's an endless discussion as well about how if they did a good job or not. And like, when I started playing in Revised, we went to Usenet and there were like 100 other people to talk to in the country, and that was it. And people published incredible articles even back then, but there wasn't this constant churn of like, is something wrong? We did something wrong. Instant feedback. It's happening immediately. Like that's just the world that we live in right now. And so we're feeling that as part of Magic as well. So, I hope that, people do recognize that they're trying to do something with these formats, with these bans, and I think it's going to be good.
And Magic lost the gathering. We lost half of the game, which was hanging out with your friends and having a good time. And those moments oftentimes I think offset the feel bad moments that came from unbalanced metagames. And so I agree with what Dave is saying, that right now the lens of like how healthy this format is, how fun is just it's more magnified than it has been in the past. And I feel like that's probably playing some contribution to not how the design is going or how fun the games are, but maybe more so like public perception towards what the formats are like.
Yeah, Spike, I would even maybe rewind your frame of reference for when Modern started on this good path a little. I'll rewind it back a little to when they unbanned Jace and Bloodbraid Elf. Mm-hmm. Like I think that was a great unban too that contributed to Modern's overall healthy development.
Yeah, maybe. I agree.
But and like also I think they're fine with bans being the way they curate the format rather than doing it in the design process where they have to be beholden to so many stakeholders, because, and this is going to sound super cynical, but I mean it, I'm coming at this from a place of acceptance. I don't think they care that much about like week to week tournament play when they're printing money. And the game from a sales perspective for a toy company hasn't suffered. And we know that because of investor calls and stuff that Foresight like spills on streams. Like if they're still able to maintain such a devoted audience that's so ready and willing and even rejoices when they correct their mistakes, I think they haven't really done permanent damage. And I think that speaks to the quality of the game at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it does. But I think they also know that they're playing with fire when they make too many mistakes, because like, look at what happened to the Modern leagues on Magic Online in the last 2 weeks. They went from 1,200 people A new set comes out. 1,200 people are in the leagues at the end of the last season. Super excited. And then as soon as Tibalt gets unlocked, 600 people in the leagues, 650 people, like half the people just disappear. And so I think they recognize that there are ramifications for their actions too. So they care because they care about the whales, meaning the people who spend the most money on the game. But I think that they're willing to increase those error bars a little bit more than they were 5-8 years ago. And that's the era that we live in right now.
Well, I don't really know who we're talking about when we say they, you know what I mean? Because I do think that there are like corporate executives over at Hasbro who don't care, and who they really do care all about the amount of money that things bring in. But I do think that the people in charge of the ban decisions and in charge of the card design are almost exclusively cultivated from people who love Magic and old professional players and card designers and Mark Rosewater and Ian Duke, and the play design team is just full of people who love Magic and have left better jobs because they love the game. And so I think that it's less of a callousness from the people who are making a lot of these decisions and more of the fact that they have so many different people working to solve the same problems and different opinions and different focus, and new things come up and they happen so quickly. And I would say that it's more of just it takes time to process with that many different smart people rather than a vague they pulling all the strings,
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, that extends all the way to the senior leaders of the Magic team, like Aaron Forsythe. I was at a PTQ with him in 1999. You know what I mean? Before he went to Wizards. And it was he and Randy Buehler and Eric Lauer were at a table Rochester drafting after the whole thing, before any of them ended up at WOTC. These are people who care, even though Aaron is tough on Twitter. You know what I mean? And then the funny thing with me about the suits at Hasbro, I don't know how much of it, maybe we're going to cut some of this from the podcast, but the suits, I don't think understand, the people who are really behind the money part of Hasbro's goals, they probably don't understand Magic enough to understand the impact that these decisions are having, gameplay wise, either way. So what they want to know is that people are making more money off of it, and that's kind of their job. So it's Aaron and Eric's, those folks' responsibility to protect the game, and they have for a long time. They've been there for a long time. So
Dave, this sounds like someone with creative experience inside a larger organization. Speaking from experience.
I mean, you know how it works.
Yeah, I think a lot of in my opinion, most of the mismanaging as far as Magic goes comes from these executive decisions that honestly seem clearly made by people who don't care about the game, the decision to cut GP coverage, the decision to got the Pro Tour purse, the decision to restructure the Pro Tour, I think was made honestly just arbitrarily by the new president of the Magic the Gathering. I can't remember his name, but I really do think those have been, in my opinion, the decisions to be the most critical of by Wizards of the Coast, that have felt the most detached from the player base and detached from the game. But I personally don't feel the card design and ban decisions have felt that way to me for a long time. But that's just my take. Everybody's got their own opinion.
And we are so grateful that you were here to provide your takes tonight, Evart.
I'm happy to be here.
On episode 112, an episode many said we would never get to.
Yeah, 100. They were 112, not a chance.
Those guys.
111 tops. Okay, that wraps up this week's show. Evart, thanks again.
Evart, where can people find you, though?
They can't. I'm currently unavailable. No plug this time.
Twitch.tv/Aspiringspike.
Hold my calls.
I'm happy to be on here. I love you guys. Give me a good thing to do on my weeknights when it's snowing in Texas.
Listeners, people of the earth, if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. Sometimes Everett's on them. Sometimes we have other guests and bonus episodes. Bare minimum, you get Stan, Dave, and Shane, 3 best friends from the Midwest. Known each other their whole lives. And we'll stick together till the end.
Or at least episode 113.
Also, if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast, pick our brain the suits at Hasbro. You can find us on Twitter at The Dive Down, all one word. You can even email us, thedivedown@gmail.com. You can support the show over on Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can also support the show with a Mana Trader subscription. If you sign up for Mana Traders using promo code TheDiveDown, all one word, you'll get 15% off your first 3 months of renting Magic Online cards. The one other way to support the show, except just sending us cash directly in an envelope, is by downloading the Untapped Arena Tracker for free over at untapped.thedivedown.com. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and be a spy!